Hi, and welcome back to Beginner Crochet. If you're joining us, this is your first class, you can go back to our previous classes if there's something you missed that you need to catch up on. If this is your first time, welcome. Today we are going to talk about working in the round. Everything that we've done so far has been flat, which is something like a scarf or a blanket, things that lay flat, where you're working in rows going back and forth along the same row of stitches. Working in the round, the stitches aren't any different. You're just differently working in a different shape. Why do we work in the round? What kind of things can we do in the round? Things can in the round like a hat. This is a little hat that I've made, and it's in the round because you can see it goes around. Other things that you can make in the round, things that I've done, something, are the little stuffed animals, the amigurumi. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but that's how I say it. So I make a lot of these. So I have an octopus, and he's kind of simple, an eyeball monster, excuse me, and even something even more complicated, which is this little water elemental dragon here that I've made. He is a combination of in the round and flat work that is stitched together and crocheted together. His arms are actually crocheted into the body. This part is flat. The chest piece is flat. The body parts are all in the round. The wings are flat. The tail bits here are flat. So he's a combination of in the round and flat. That's another example of flat work. So in the round literally means in the round. It means you're going to start in a circle. And you're going to usually start with a really small circle and work your way out. I have yet to find anything where you start a really large and work your way in, because it just doesn't work that way. So we're going to talk about 2 ways to work in the round today. And I'm going to show you how to make a magic circle. It's called a magic circle. But if it says that in a pattern, you will now know what it means, because I'm going to show you that today. All right, we'll be right back. Okay, so now we're going to begin to work in the round. There's about 2 different ways to begin something that's round. I prefer the magic circle that I'm going to show you today. Most patterns I use call it a magic circle and begin a round piece with a magic circle. You can see the circle and the beginning of a round piece if you look at the top. I'll show you here on our octopus. So here's our octopus, and he began right here, this circle. This is where the circle began. He's also kind of got a little seam, and I'll show you how you do that in a minute. You can look at the top of my hat here. Here is the circle right there that I began the hat with. And if we look on my dragon here, here's the bottom of one of his arms. Here's the circle. You can see exactly what it is. That's where we begun the piece, working in the round. I also have a stitch marker. I'll show you what we're going to do with that later. If you do not have a stitch marker, and I crocheted for a very long time without a stitch marker, you can use a paper clip or anything else that you can use to slide in and out between the yarn. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. First, we're going to make a magic circle. So I have the end of my yarn right here. I have my pointer finger. I'm wrapping the yarn around 2 complete times. It looks like 3, but really we're talking about these 2. Take my hook. I'm going to go underneath these 2 pieces here. I'm going to hook this piece. This piece is attached to my skein. Hook it and drag it through under both pieces. I have a loop on my hook. I'm going to hook this piece again, this piece that I dragged under, and I'm going to give it a little chain stitch. Okay, this does not count as a stitch. This counts as part of the magic circle. There you have it. It's a circle. So what we're going to use this for is to crochet into the circle in order to make that ring that we can then use as a base to make our project. So we're going to go underneath and through this circle, hook the yarn, pull it up. I have 2 loops, hook and pull it through. It's a single crochet stitch. We're going to do it 5 more times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A lot of round pieces start with 6. They could be 4, they could be 8, but 6 is a good number to start. It's a nice even number. So then I have this, and it doesn't look like that octopus that I showed you or any of those pieces I showed you with the end. we have this tail. We're going to pull the tail. What I like to do is I pull it a little bit and I say, okay, this is the one that it's pulling. So I want to grab the other one and I want to gently pull it. Are we going to cooperate? Sometimes it doesn't. There we go. We're going to pull it until I get this. I'm going to grab this one. This is, let me back up. This is the tail. This is the one it's pulling on, and it's pulling in this direction. I'm grabbing at this end to pull this one short. So, pulling this one to pull this other one short. Some people just grab it and pull. I find it's too much sometimes. You can't really get a tight circle. But if you do it this way, so to go back, what I'm doing is I'm pulling the tail to see which piece. It pulls this direction at this end, so I'm going to the other end of that loop and I'm pulling to get this second loop tight. Don't worry about the first loop right now. So I'm pulling the first loop tight. Then I'm going to take the tail and I'm going to give it a tug. This one might be a little harder because it's tight now, and it's tight. There you go. I have made a magic circle with 6 single crochet stitches. It looks a little funny, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches. Here's where we're going to talk about what we do. There's 2 ways to work in the round. The first is just to work in a continuous spiral. And it seems like that's pretty easy, but then your next question is, how do I remember where I stopped and where I started? Where does one round end and the next one begin? That's where your stitch marker comes in to play. Some people put it on the beginning of the stitch, the beginning of the round. So I like to put it on the last stitch because that way it's on top always. And all I did was hook it. You can hook it underneath both loops. You can hook it on one loop. It's just marking your stitch. There we go. I hooked it under both loops. I know this is the last stitch in the round. So then I can go to this stitch right here and I can begin again. Now, when you work in the round, obviously this is where your increases and decreases come into play, because you don't want this to just still be 6. It would just get bigger. It wouldn't even get bigger. It would just stay really small. You may have a pattern like the dragon tail where you do several rounds of the same number of stitches because you want that tiny piece to be a tube. But if you want something like a hat, you're not going to work in 6 stitches, so you're going to increase. So I'm going to double every stitch. So I'm going to go 2 in each stitch. So this is 2. I'm going to move a little closer so you can see. Then I'm going to go to the next stitch. Ooh, focus. Focus would be great. There we go. Focus would be great. And I'm going to do 2 stitches. So I'm going an increase in every stitch. Now, since I know math, I know that I should have 12 stitches by the time when I get to that. I should have 10 stitches when I get to the stitch marker, and then stitch 2 in the last to make 12 stitches. And I'm doing this so you can see it gets big kind of fast so you can see it better. Okay. Now I'm here so I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to take out my stitch marker. I'm going to do 2 into this last single crochet. And then I'm going to put my stitch marker back on the new last stitch of the round. Okay, so that's how you would work in the round with a stitch marker. Move it down a little bit. Are we going to focus? There we go. I might move this down a little bit for you to see. That might be better. Okay. So there you are. So I have 2 rows. This is my magic circle row with 6. This is my second round with 12 because I've doubled every one. I did an increase in every one. And you're not going to do an increase in every one. Follow your pattern to see how you're going to make your project bigger or smaller. When you're going to make it smaller, you're going to use decreases. You would decrease it the same way in the round as you do when you are flat. And if you don't remember, you can go back to our increase and decrease video to see how we do that. The second way to work in the round is a slip stitch chain 1. And in some ways, this takes a little getting used to, because you have to know what you have to stitch into and what you need to skip. So I'm taking that off right now. I know there's 12. So the next one I would do, I want to do 18, which means it's a group of 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 1 in this one and then 2 in the next one. So it's a single crochet, double crochet pattern. 2, 3, 4. You know what? I'm going to do this again. I'm going to show you how to do a slip stitch chain 1 from the beginning. Let's start with our magic circle. Changed my mind. So we're going to start with our magic circle. We're going to go wrap it around, underneath, maybe. Come on. My hook doesn't want to go today. Underneath. And if it's too tight, it won't go. So don't wrap it around your finger too tight. Grab that extra yarn, that tail yarn from the skein, and do this. All right, we're going to do 6 single crochets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 single crochets. We're going to pull our tail a little bit. Okay, it's this one this time. Now I'm going to tighten the other loop. A whole lot easier this time. Tighten it and then pull the tail to get it nice and small. So if I'm going to work in the round without a stitch marker, I need a slip stitch chain 1. Your pattern will likely tell you which method you should use. So when you read it in the pattern, now you won't be confused. You can use it's in the round in a spiral with a stitch marker, or like this with slip stitch chain 1. So what you're going to do, here is my last, or my first chain, single crochet in the magic circle. It's my stitch number 1. I'm going to go under both loops like I'm doing a single crochet, hook my yarn. Okay, but a slip stitch, I'm skipping this part, skipping that part of the stitch. I'm just going to slide it right through this hoop, and then I'm going to chain 1. Now the confusing part for a lot of people happens when you go around again. So I'm going to double and do the same thing I did last time, but the slip stitch chain 1, usually your pattern should say, if it does not count in your stitch count. So it's like it doesn't exist. You're just using it to make your yarn taller so it can go to the next round. If you understand what that means, you're going up and across. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the same stitch that I just slip stitch chained 1. So this is still stitch number 1, and I'm going in here. I want you to see what that looks like. So here's my slip stitch, my chain 1, that I was into this stitch. I'm still staying on this stitch, and I'm going to do 2. 1, 2, and I'm going to do double the rest of the way around. 3, 4, oops, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, here's where you need to pay attention right here. So here I am. I've done 12, but I have, what do I have? I have this. It looks like I have an extra stitch. I do not have an extra stitch. This is the slip stitch. And if you look really, really closely, we can get it to focus. There we go. We can see the tiny, tiny, tiny chain 1 stitch right here. This is my slip stitch. So with the stitch marker, you just have to count to make sure you get the right number of stitches back to the stitch marker. With the slip stitch, you have to make sure you have the right number of stitches and that you do not stitch into this slip stitch. You're skipping this. So slip stitch, chain 1, you're going to finish your row and slip stitch into the first stitch of this round, which is this one, not this one. So I'm going to do this. Slip stitch, chain 1. Now I'm still staying. This is still my stitch number 1. Even though I've slip stitched into it, I'm still using this one. So we're going to do another run again so I can show you what it looks like, but I'm going to do an 18. So it's 1. So it's a single crochet, double crochet, not double crochet, single crochet increase pattern. So it's like a group of 3. 4, 5, 6. You quickly get to know when you're crocheting that you need to remember your multiplication tables. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. This pattern with the 6, 12, 18, 24 is very common in something that you want to get bigger quickly, like a hat. A lot of these beanie hat patterns start with this 6, 12, 18, 24, and then you get to a certain size and you do a few rows of the same number of stitches to make the hat straight, give it a straight section, and then you put a brim on it. With a ball like the eyeball monster here, you would do, and there is a smooth eyeball monster. I will put the link to the eyeball monster pattern because it is fairly simple. There's a fairly simple variation, which is pretty much just a ball that you can practice working on the round in. You'll do up to a certain number and then you'll start to decrease. And I guess increases and decreases are on another video. You can go back and see them. So we've done our 18 stitches in the round, but it looks like I have an extra stitch. That's my slip stitch. That's my slip stitch. This one right here. I do not want to stitch into this. You can see this tiny little chain stitch. I want to finish my row by slip stitching into this first stitch of my round. If you get lost, just count backwards. Take it to 18. This is my first stitch. Sometimes, if it's confusing for you, you can always use a stitch marker. So slip stitch, chain 1. You'll start to, as you go along, see the seam. This does make a little bit of a seam. The spiral leaves it smooth. The slip stitch chain 1 does leave a little bit of a seam. You can kind of see it on my what do you call this, octopus right here. You can kind of see my slip stitch chain 1. If you keep them relatively tight and even, you might not see it. Now I have on the hat, which I also did this way, you can see, oh, this is, I think I did this in spiral. I did this in a spiral, but I had to change the color, so there's a bit of a mark there. But if you get confused, okay, we'll do another round and I'll show you. You can do it with you can use a stitch marker. There's no rule that says you can't use a stitch marker if you're slip stitch chain 1 joining. So I'm going to do 1 just to show you how to do this. We'll do a round of 24 this time, which means it's 2 single crochets and an increase. So there's my first stitch. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, Okay, so here we are, and we've done 24. You can see that this is actually starting to turn into like a little bowl shape. We're going to talk in a minute about right side and wrong side before I forget. But look, here's my stitch marker, and I know that I have made my 24 stitches. I counted. This is my slip stitch, this is my chain 1, and I've marked my first stitch. Until you get used to it, if you want to mark that stitch, that is perfectly okay. If you miscount and you have to pull this out and do it again, that is perfectly okay. Crochet is pretty forgiving. I find it, I don't knit. I think it's not as forgiving because if you mess up, it's really complicated to take it out. This is really easy if you make a mistake. Okay, so at right side and wrong side, if you're making something like a hat or any of the stuffed animals that have a curve to them, and if you're working in the round, it's likely going to have a curve. This is the right side. This is the wrong side. You can see they look different. What you want to do is when it starts to make that bowl shape, you'll feel it start to bowl up when you get to like row 3 or 4. You want to turn it so that the wrong side, which if you did it, you know, the right way, you're going to have the tail is going to be tucked inside. You want to work on the outside of the work. And I'm telling you this because I crocheted inside out for probably 6 months when I first started crocheting. I made several things that were inside out. It didn't look bad, but I was working, and then I started working like from this way, from the inside, which gets really complicated when you're working with small work. It took me 6 months to figure out I was working backwards. So make sure that you pull, and you're always working your outside. You're working around the outside. You should never be working from the inside. You're working from the outside. So I hope that that was helpful to you with working in the round. I will, like I said, I will put some links in the description to some projects that you can try in the round, some beginner projects, and leave me some comments. Let me know how you did. If you like my videos, please like and subscribe. Have a great day.